The moment I realized my HOA had changed the locks on my house, I stopped thinking like a homeowner and started thinking like a vault builder. The rain hit my jacket in cold, steady sheets as I stood on my front porch at 11:47 p.m., staring at a dead brass lock that hadn't been there that morning. My key slid in halfway, then stopped with a dull metallic click that echoed louder than the thunder rolling over Willow Creek Estates. For 3 seconds I just stood there holding the grocery bag in one hand and my old key ring in the other, trying to convince myself I was tired, maybe using the wrong key, maybe losing my mind after another 14-hour shift. Then the porch light snapped on above me. Warm yellow light spilled across the wet concrete, and my stomach tightened when I noticed fresh scratches around the doorknob. Somebody had changed the entire lock assembly. The smell of wet cedar and cold asphalt hung in the air while rainwater dripped from the edge of the roof onto my boots. That's when my phone buzzed. HOA Community Alert. I opened the message with numb fingers. Due to ongoing compliance concerns and emergency inspection requirements, temporary security modifications have been made to your property access points. Security modifications. That was the phrase Brenda Whitmore used when she wanted to make something illegal sound professional. I looked through the front window and saw my living room lamp glowing softly beside the recliner where my wife used to sit during chemo treatments 3 years ago. Same blanket folded over the armrest. Same old jazz radio beside the bookshelf. Except now I couldn't get inside my own house. My jaw tightened so hard I could feel pressure behind my ears. Brenda lived 4 houses down in a white colonial with decorative stone lions near the driveway entrance, and right on cue, her Lexus crawled past the curb like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. The window rolled down halfway. Rain tapped against the polished paint while her smile floated through the darkness sharp enough to cut steel. "Oh good," she said sweetly. "You got the notice." I could smell her expensive perfume even through the rain. "What did you do to my house?" She tilted her head like I was being unreasonable. The HOA exercised emergency access authority after repeated refusal to comply with inspection requests. I actually laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because my brain genuinely couldn't process the level of arrogance standing 20 feet away from me. "You changed my locks." "Temporary measure," she corrected. "You'll receive the updated access code once the board completes its review." Access code. To my own front door. The rain grew heavier, bouncing off the porch railing in silver streaks while thunder rattled the windows behind me. Brenda smiled one last time and drove away slowly, tires hissing against the wet pavement like a snake disappearing into tall grass. I stood there another minute staring at the lock, listening to the quiet hum of my own house behind a door I no longer controlled. Then I noticed something else. Tiny drill marks near the frame. Cheap installation work. Sloppy. Amateur. My fingers brushed the cold steel, and for the first time in years, an old part of my brain woke back up. The part that used to design reinforced vault systems for regional banks across Texas. The part that understood pressure ratings, deadbolts, relocking mechanisms, and doors built specifically to keep unwanted people out. Brenda thought she'd locked me out of my own house. What she didn't understand was simple. If you push the right man far enough, eventually he stops building homes and starts building fortresses. I spent that first night sleeping in my truck with rain hammering the windshield hard enough to shake the mirrors. Every few minutes I caught myself staring at the dark outline of my own house, sitting 50 feet away like it belonged to somebody else. The dashboard clock glowed 2:13 a.m. in pale green while the heater pushed out dry air that smelled faintly like dust and engine oil. I could still see the lamp burning in the living room through the curtains Brenda had no business looking at, let alone locking me away from. That house was the last honest thing left in my life. My wife Claire and I bought it 12 years earlier before Willow Creek turned into one of those polished suburban neighborhoods where every mailbox looked military grade and every lawn got judged like a county fair competition. Back then the street still smelled like fresh dirt after rainstorms. Kids rode bikes without somebody measuring fence height violations. Claire loved the quiet. Said the maple tree in the backyard sounded like ocean waves when the wind hit the branches just right. After the cancer diagnosis, that house became a hospital, then a sanctuary, then eventually a mausoleum filled with memories I could not throw away even when people told me I should move on. Her coffee mug still sat beside the sink because one morning I realized washing it felt too permanent. Grief does strange things to a man. It teaches you how to survive in rooms full of ghosts. Around sunrise, the rain finally slowed to a soft hiss against the pavement. I walked to the porch carrying a thermos of truck stop coffee and looked closer at the new lock. Cheap brushed nickel. Hardware store garbage. Whoever installed it rushed the alignment because the deadbolt scratched against the strike plate every time pressure hit the door. I crouched near the frame and noticed fresh wood splinters near the hinges. They had forced entry before replacing the hardware. My stomach turned cold. Not because they broke in. Because they walked through Claire's house like they owned it. By 8:30 that morning I was sitting in the HOA office listening to fluorescent lights buzz overhead, while Brenda pretended to shuffle paperwork behind a fake mahogany desk. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. Framed photos of neighborhood cookouts covered the walls beside plaques celebrating community excellence like this woman thought she was running a small country instead of a homeowners association. She did not even offer me a seat. The board determined your property presented concerns regarding compliance transparency, she said calmly. Transparency, I repeated. You broke into my house. Her smile tightened. The governing bylaws allow emergency access under extraordinary circumstances. I leaned forward slowly. What emergency? She tapped a folder with manicured fingernails. Repeated refusal to cooperate creates uncertainty within the community. There it was. Not safety. Not damage. Not crime. Uncertainty. Brenda did not care about houses. She cared about control. I noticed something then sitting behind her shoulder. A wall of labeled keys hanging inside a locked cabinet. Unit numbers. Resident names. Master access copies. The realization hit me like ice water down my spine. She had keys to dozens of homes. Maybe more. The entire neighborhood had handed this woman access to their private lives because she wore pastel sweaters and spoke in polite legal language. Brenda followed my eyes and casually closed the cabinet door. You should try being part of the community, Ethan, she said softly. People who isolate themselves usually create suspicion. Outside the office window, I watched a landscaping crew trimming hedges in perfectly straight lines while sprinklers clicked across bright green lawns. Everything in Willow Creek looked controlled, measured, managed. And suddenly I understood exactly what kind of war this was going to be. Not loud, not physical, precise, mechanical, patient. The same way you crack a vault without ever using explosives. The first camera went up that same afternoon. Small black dome above the garage. Wide-angle lens facing the driveway and front porch. By sunset I had 6 more installed around the property, each one feeding directly into a secure recorder hidden inside my workshop behind an old steel cabinet full of drill bits and welding clamps. The familiar smell of machine oil and hot solder calmed me down in a way whiskey never could. Some men deal with betrayal by yelling. I deal with it by building systems. Brenda probably thought changing my locks would scare me into compliance. What she actually did was force me to start paying attention. 3 days later the footage started answering questions I did not even know to ask. At exactly 1:12 p.m., while I was downtown meeting with an attorney about unlawful entry laws, a white HOA maintenance van rolled into my driveway. One man stepped out carrying a clipboard. Another unlocked my front door using a silver master key. They walked inside like it was completely normal. No emergency vehicles. No alarms. No flood. No smoke. Just 2 strangers entering my house because some suburban tyrant decided privacy had become optional. I sat frozen in my workshop office replaying the footage over and over while the hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. One of them opened kitchen cabinets. Another walked through the hallway toward Claire's old art room. My hands tightened around the edge of the desk hard enough to make the wood creak. They stayed inside for 19 minutes. 19 quiet minutes inside a home they did not own. Then they locked the door behind them and drove away. That was the moment something inside me changed permanently. Up until then I still believed this could be solved with complaints and paperwork. But that footage showed me the truth. Brenda had built an entire system around access. Not ownership. Access. The ability to walk into someone's life whenever she decided they were not cooperative enough. I drove across town that night to see an old friend named Ray Delaney, who owned a commercial salvage yard near the industrial district. The place smelled like rust, diesel fuel, and wet concrete. Floodlights illuminated rows of stripped machinery stacked like giant steel skeletons under the Texas night sky. Ray looked up from a welding bench when I walked in and immediately knew something was wrong. "You got that look again," he muttered, wiping grease from his hands. "Same look you had after the Dallas Credit Union job." I nodded toward the back lot. "You still got the modular door?" Ray stared at me for a second without speaking. Then he slowly smiled. "You are serious?" The vault door had come out of an old regional bank outside Fort Worth after a renovation project 2 years earlier. 8,000 pounds of reinforced steel. Triple relocking system. 4-inch composite core. Built to withstand torches, drills, hydraulic spreaders, and desperate people with too much time on their hands. Most commercial buyers thought it was excessive for residential use. I stood there running my fingers across the cold steel surface while rainwater dripped from overhead beams onto the concrete floor. The massive hinges looked like something off a submarine hatch. Quiet. Heavy. Permanent. Ray folded his arms. "You planning to survive the apocalypse in your living room?" "No," I said calmly. "I am planning to keep my homeowners association outside." The forklift engine roared to life while sparks flashed somewhere deeper in the warehouse. For the first time in days, I finally slept that night. Not because the problem was solved, because I had a blueprint now. Brenda Whitmore thought locks gave her power. She had no idea what real security actually looked like. I drove back to my house under a fading orange sky. Rain still glossing the driveway, every puddle reflecting a fragment of a world that suddenly felt fragile and controlled. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of sprinklers turning off and the occasional metallic clink of a wind chime swaying in a light breeze. I parked the truck 30 feet from the garage and stepped out, boots crunching against wet gravel. My eyes scanned the front door where the old nickel lock had been replaced with a temporary brass cylinder. The new door would not arrive for another week, and that gave me time to plan, observe, and prepare. Inside the living room, the smell of aged cedar and coffee lingered, mixing with the faint ozone of the rain. I ran my fingers over the edge of the old wooden table, remembering Claire's handwriting on notes she left in the margins of bills and letters. Every corner of the house carried memory, and every memory became part of the plan. I spent the afternoon walking from room to room, inspecting frames, floors, windows, and locks, cataloging each one with my phone camera. I opened the basement workshop and checked every tool, every bolt, and every spare hinge. The fluorescent light overhead flickered softly, revealing a floor dusted with iron filings from previous projects. I traced the sound of a distant lawn mower cutting the neighborhood grass, a rhythmic percussion against the quiet hum of my own thoughts. By early evening, I had blueprints spread across the kitchen table. Precise measurements, weight calculations, hinge placements, and locking points. Every aspect considered. The bank vault door from Ray's salvage yard would not be just a replacement. It would be integrated into the frame, anchored to reinforced steel, welded and bolted so that no one could manipulate it without proper knowledge and tools. I made mental notes of timing for each crew visit, which tools were needed first, and how to stage the delivery without alerting neighbors or the HOA. As night fell, the streetlights illuminated the glistening rooftops across Willow Creek Estates. I could see movement in some windows, shadows of families eating dinner, watching television, living lives that assumed privacy was natural. I thought about Brenda Whitmore's obsession with control, how she patrolled lawns and trimmed hedges as if inspecting souls, and I smiled faintly because she had underestimated patience, preparation, and precision. The vault door's mass, 8,000 pounds of hardened steel, required careful calculation to move and set in place, yet I felt a quiet thrill knowing that the work would be methodical, satisfying, and unavoidable in its consequence. I checked my footage once more from the security system, seeing the angles of the previous HOA entry, understanding their movements and routines, and then I shut down the monitors and sat on the porch with the rain-damp air around me, tasting the metallic tang of anticipation. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of wet pine and fresh mulch from neighboring yards. The house, my home, would remain mine. Every hinge, every bolt, every lock became a statement of precision, of lawfulness, and of deliberate counteraction. That night I did not sleep in panic or anger. I slept calculating and observing. The neighborhood would not know what hit them, and I would not reveal a single step until the first moment the vault door clicked into its final position. The next morning the delivery truck arrived precisely at 7:15, its engine humming softly against the quiet neighborhood as I watched from the porch with a thermos of coffee warming my hands. The driver backed the flatbed into the driveway while two assistants unstrapped the massive steel vault door and maneuvered it carefully onto a custom dolly I had prepared in the garage. The air smelled of fresh rain, hot rubber from the truck tires, and the faint tang of lubricating oil on the dolly wheels. I guided the team with precise instructions, pointing to the reinforced steel frame I had installed a week earlier, making sure every hinge, bolt, and relocking mechanism lined up perfectly with the calculations I had sketched out late into the previous nights. Neighbors walking their dogs glanced curiously, some stopping to comment on the unusual operation, but none interfered as I had considered their movements and sightlines carefully. The vault door moved with a controlled rhythm, the sound of metal scraping against the reinforced frame echoing faintly like a distant drum, each tap and grind reinforcing the precision of the installation. Inside, the house smelled like cedar, coffee, and faint ozone from welding sparks, a combination that reminded me of every late night I had spent working in workshops across Texas, reinforcing doors, assembling locks, and calibrating complex mechanisms. By mid-morning, the door was nearly in position, and I stepped back to inspect the alignment, checking with a level and a tape measure to confirm that everything matched the detailed plans. The bolts were installed in sequence, torque applied evenly, and the deadbolts engaged smoothly, each one producing a satisfying metallic click that sounded louder than expected in the quiet street. I documented every step with my phone, knowing that footage might serve as evidence of lawful installation if questions arose from HOA oversight or local inspectors. Around 11, I stepped outside to wipe sweat from my brow, noticing how sunlight reflected off the wet pavement and the steel surface, casting a shimmering glow across the front yard. A light breeze carried the scent of pine and freshly cut grass, mingling with the faint diesel from the delivery truck, reminding me of the precise timing and coordination required to make this operation invisible to any potential interference. By noon, the last hinge was fastened, the final bolt tightened, and I stepped back to admire the full weight of the vault door now firmly anchored in place. Moved only when intended, silent to the casual observer, impervious to manipulation, and completely aligned with all permits and legal requirements I had meticulously verified. The quiet hum of neighborhood activity continued around me while I ran my hands across the steel, feeling the cool surface, the slight texture from factory machining, and the perfect weight distribution. Every detail I had considered, the dimensions, the reinforcement, the relocking mechanisms, was exactly as planned. The delivery team packed up and left, and for the first time in several days, I could stand on the porch and feel complete control over my own home. The house filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and cedar, safe from intrusion, and finally under my total oversight while the neighborhood carried on around me, unaware of the meticulous precision that had just been executed to ensure that every inch of my property was secure, lawful, and entirely untouchable by outside authority. The reaction started faster than I expected. By sunrise the next morning, cars slowed down in front of my house like tourists passing a roadside attraction. Minivans crept along the curb. Joggers stopped pretending to stretch just long enough to stare at the massive steel door sitting behind my brick entryway like the entrance to a Cold War bunker. Even the air felt different that morning. Cooler. Sharper. The smell of wet mulch and fresh-cut grass drifted through the neighborhood, while sunlight reflected off the brushed steel surface behind me. I sat on the porch drinking black coffee, listening to the soft mechanical hum of the vault's internal relocking system cycling during calibration tests. Beautiful sound. Clean. Precise. Permanent. At exactly 9:12, Brenda Whitmore marched up my driveway carrying a clipboard tucked against her chest like a shield. Beige cardigan. White capri pants. Sunglasses large enough to hide half her face. 2 HOA board members followed behind her looking nervous already. I could hear the sharp click of her heels against the concrete before she even reached the porch. "What exactly is that?" she demanded without greeting me. I took another sip of coffee. "A door." Her jaw tightened instantly. "You installed commercial-grade security equipment without board approval." "Actually," I replied calmly, "County Permit Office classified it as a residential security modification under existing property improvement statutes." I handed her copies of the permits already sealed in plastic sleeves. I watched her expression shift slightly when she saw official county stamps across every page. Brenda was used to people panicking. arguing, apologizing. She was not used to preparation. One of the board members adjusted his glasses and stared at the vault hinges. How much does this thing weigh? About 4 tons, I answered. Depends whether humidity affects the frame. His face went pale. Brenda ignored him and stepped closer to inspect the locking mechanism. The HOA reserves emergency access rights, she snapped. Not anymore. She blinked behind the sunglasses. Excuse me. I leaned back slowly in the porch chair while the morning breeze carried the scent of pine needles through the yard. You changed my locks under something you called emergency authority. So now I upgraded my security under actual legal authority. Her fingers tightened around the clipboard hard enough to whiten her knuckles. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head while she searched for a way around it. This creates a safety concern, she finally said. Fire personnel may require access. Fire department already approved the installation yesterday afternoon. That one landed hard. I watched one of the other board members glance sideways at Brenda like he was realizing for the first time she might not actually control everything. The silence stretched for several seconds except for the distant hiss of sprinklers turning on down the street. Then came the sound that almost made me smile. The vault locking system cycled automatically from inside the house. Clunk. Heavy steel bolts settling into place with the kind of finality you feel in your chest. Brenda physically flinched at the sound. You cannot lock the association out of your property, she said quietly. Watch me, I answered. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she turned sharply and walked back toward the sidewalk without another word, heels striking the pavement faster this time. One board member followed immediately. The other lingered for half a second staring at the vault door before muttering something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, good for him. By noon the entire neighborhood Facebook page had exploded. Pictures of my front entrance were everywhere. Some residents called it ridiculous. Others called it genius. But buried underneath all the arguments was something new. Questions. Questions about master keys. Questions about unauthorized inspections. Questions about how many homes the HOA had entered over the years without permission. I sat in my workshop that evening watching comments pile up across the screen while the soft smell of welding steel still lingered in the air. Brenda thought the vault door was the problem. She still had not realized it was actually evidence. 2 days later Brenda came back with reinforcements. I heard them before I saw them. Car doors shutting outside. Shoes scraping across concrete. Low voices trying to sound official. Through the security monitor in my workshop, I counted 6 people standing in my driveway under the hot Texas sun. Brenda in her usual pastel armor. 2 HOA board members. A locksmith carrying a hard black equipment case. A fire inspector in a Navy County shirt. And one local patrol officer who already looked exhausted before the conversation even started. The smell of hot dust drifted through the open garage while cicadas buzzed in the trees overhead loud enough to sound electrical. I wiped grease from my hands with a shop towel and walked slowly to the front entrance. Brenda stepped forward immediately like she had rehearsed this moment in a mirror. We are conducting an official safety review, she announced. Your modifications may violate emergency access compliance. Funny, I said calmly, because county permits say otherwise. The fire inspector cleared his throat awkwardly and adjusted the clipboard under his arm. Sir, we just need to confirm operational safety standards. Unlike Brenda, he sounded reasonable. Tired. Like a man who knew he got dragged into neighborhood politics against his will. I nodded once and stepped aside from the porch. Go ahead. The locksmith approached first. Mid-50s. Sweat darkening the collar of his blue uniform shirt. He crouched beside the vault frame and immediately stopped moving. I watched his expression change the second he saw the relocking bolts. You have got to be kidding me, he muttered quietly. Brenda folded her arms. Can you open it? He stared at her over his shoulder like she had asked him to dismantle a submarine with a butter knife. Ma'am, this thing is commercial-grade composite steel. Triple relock system. Internal deadbolt cage. He tapped the metal lightly with the handle of a screwdriver. The deep metallic sound echoed through the porch like a church bell. You do not open this without authorization. Brenda's smile twitched. But it is a residential property. Does not matter, the locksmith answered. The installation is legal if permitted. The patrol officer looked relieved hearing that. The fire inspector stepped closer and examined the emergency override documentation mounted beside the frame. Actually, he said slowly, everything appears compliant. Brenda spun toward him so fast her sunglasses nearly slipped off. You cannot be serious. The inspector shrugged carefully. The owner followed code requirements. I stood quietly near the porch railing while warm wind carried the smell of cut grass across the street. Neighbors had started gathering now. Not openly watching. Just pretending to collect mail or walk dogs while staring from a distance. Willow Creek had become a live television show overnight. Brenda lowered her voice, but I could still hear every word. The HOA has authority over community access standards. The patrol officer finally spoke for the first time. Ma'am, HOA rules do not override county permits. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that changes power in a room. Brenda looked around and realized nobody standing there was backing her anymore. Not the inspector. Not the locksmith. Not even her own board members. Then the vault system cycled automatically again from inside the house. Clunk. The steel bolt settled into place. With a slow mechanical finality that seemed to vibrate through the brick walls themselves. One of the neighbors across the street actually smiled. Brenda's face turned pale beneath the makeup. This is not over, she said quietly. I looked directly at her for the first time all morning. No, I answered calmly. It really is. That evening my security cameras recorded something unexpected. Residents visiting each other's houses carrying folders. Printed documents. HOA bylaws. Property agreements. People were comparing notes now. Asking questions. And around 9:30 that night, an elderly woman named Carol Henderson emailed me security footage from 6 months earlier showing Brenda entering her home while she was hospitalized after knee surgery. Same clipboard. Same master key. Same smile. I sat alone in my workshop watching the footage replay under fluorescent lights while the faint smell of machine oil filled the room. Brenda thought she ruled the neighborhood through paperwork and intimidation. But fear only works until somebody finally locks the door. By Friday morning, the entire neighborhood felt tense in that quiet suburban way where nobody raises their voice, but everybody starts watching curtains instead of television. Cars slowed near my driveway. HOA board members stopped making eye contact during their morning walks. Even the landscaping crews seemed uncomfortable trimming hedges beneath windows where people had suddenly begun questioning who really held the keys to their homes. The air smelled like fresh fertilizer and heat, baking off concrete while storm clouds gathered low over Willow Creek estates. Inside my workshop, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while I organized folders across the steel workbench. Printed bylaws. Security footage timestamps. County permits. Email chains. Every document labeled with the same precision I once used building vault systems for regional banks. Organization matters when people finally start listening. Around noon my phone started vibrating nonstop. Residents were sending footage now. Photos. Statements. Stories. A retired couple on Birch Lane claimed Brenda entered their garage during a storage compliance review while they were visiting family in Arizona. Another homeowner found pictures of her backyard furniture inside HOA violation files despite never giving permission for inspections beyond the property line. The pattern became impossible to ignore once people stopped being afraid to compare experiences. Brenda had spent years convincing everyone they were isolated cases. But systems like hers only survive when victims stay separated. At 2:30 that afternoon, a certified letter arrived taped to my mailbox inside a bright red legal envelope. I already knew who sent it before opening it. Notice of emergency board action. The HOA was fining me $2,000 per day for architectural hostility, negatively impacting community harmony. I actually laughed out loud standing there in the driveway. The phrase sounded like it had been written by a committee of angry interior designers. Across the street, old man Harold Benson nearly dropped his rake when he heard me laughing. They really sent that, he called out carefully. I held up the paper. Apparently my front door hurt somebody's feelings. Harold shook his head slowly. Brenda used to be normal. The wind picked up then, carrying the sharp smell of rain and distant thunder through the neighborhood. Storm season in Texas always arrives like something alive crawling over the horizon. That evening the community clubhouse hosted an emergency HOA meeting. I almost did not go. But around sunset Carol Henderson called me personally. Her voice trembled slightly through the phone. "People need to hear this publicly," she said. "They need to know they are not crazy." By 7:05 the clubhouse parking lot was overflowing. Pickup trucks, luxury SUVs, sedans lined along both curbs while lightning flickered behind dark clouds overhead. Inside, the room smelled like burnt coffee and nervous sweat. Brenda stood near the podium wearing another pastel blazer, trying desperately to look composed while whispers moved through the crowd like static electricity. I sat quietly in the back holding a single folder under my arm. No speech prepared. No dramatic entrance. Just evidence. One by one residents started speaking before I even had to stand up. Carol described strangers entering her home during recovery surgery. Harold admitted Brenda threatened fines after he refused to provide garage access keys. Another resident revealed maintenance workers photographed inside rooms unrelated to any exterior violations. Every story sounded almost identical. Same clipboard. Same emergency authority. Same abuse hidden beneath polite language. Brenda tried interrupting twice before the room turned against her completely. Then I walked to the front carrying the folder. The fluorescent lights reflected against the steel binder clips, while thunder rattled the clubhouse windows behind me. I plugged my laptop into the projector and pressed play. Security footage filled the screen showing HOA workers entering my house with master keys while I was gone. No emergency. No danger. Just quiet trespassing disguised as procedure. The room fell dead silent except for the low hum of the projector fan. Brenda's face lost all color. Then came the final clip. Footage from Carol Henderson's hallway camera 6 months earlier. Same entry pattern. Same unauthorized access. Somebody near the back of the room whispered the word lawsuit. Brenda looked around slowly at the crowd she once controlled and realized something terrifying. Nobody was looking at her like a leader anymore. They were looking at her like evidence. By the end of the week, Willow Creek Estates had a different energy. Mail carriers paused to peer at my front door. Neighbors waved in the street with subtle nods of acknowledgement, and the air carried a sense of quiet authority that had nothing to do with HOA newsletters or committee votes. I walked through the house checking every sensor and camera, the familiar smell of cedar and machine oil filling my lungs as the fluorescent workshop lights hummed steadily above me. Each relocking bolt engaged perfectly, the steel surface smooth and cold under my hands, a tactile confirmation that the planning, measurements, and calculations had all been precise. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the driveway, highlighting the subtle shimmer of rain-soaked concrete and the slight reflections in the brushed steel of the vault door. I sipped a cup of coffee, its warmth cutting through the cool evening air, and watched as a small group of residents quietly inspected the perimeter, comparing notes and exchanging low voices, their curiosity now guided by transparency instead of fear. That night I heard the faint click of the vault cycling automatically as programmed, a soft rhythmic sound that filled the quiet house with a reassuring sense of finality. The neighborhood lights blinked on one by one, and the evening air smelled faintly of wet pine, mulch, and the distant hum of sprinklers shutting off. Inside, I checked the footage one last time for the day, reviewing each angle carefully, making note of the sequence of entries, any potential weak points, and confirming that every camera, every sensor, every legal document lined up with the vault installation. The porch creaked gently as I leaned against the railing, feeling the weight of control, the heavy satisfaction of preparation and foresight. I thought about Brenda Whitmore in her pastel blazers, her clipboard, her rehearsed speech patterns, the authority she assumed over lives that were not hers to govern. I could almost hear her words echoing faintly from past encounters, each one reinforcing the precision required in my planning. As darkness settled, the house glowed softly from the interior lamps, casting the vault door into relief against the shadows. Every hinge, every bolt, every reinforced steel frame element reflected light in sharp angles, a clear message to anyone who approached that access would now only be granted on my terms. The neighborhood had witnessed the evidence, the residents had begun questioning oversight, and the community had shifted from silent compliance to cautious observation. I walked inside, the aroma of coffee, cedar, and ozone following me into the kitchen, sat down, and looked out the window at the driveway, watching the last light of day flicker against the steel. The vault door stood immovable, silent, and resolute. In that quiet moment, I realized that the house was no longer simply my home. It had become a statement of lawful resilience. Demonstration of preparation, patience, and unyielding control. The storm clouds on the horizon hinted at tomorrow, but tonight the neighborhood understood one thing clearly. My property, my rules, and the measure of authority had shifted permanently. And as the evening wind rustled through the pines and the last cicadas trilled in the distance, I knew Brenda would have to reconsider every assumption she had ever made about control, access, and who really dictated the boundaries of Willow Creek Estates.